So we know that external stability involves three elements: current account deficit, net foreign liabilities, and the Australian dollar. In this video, we're going to be looking at the first part of external stability, which is the current account deficit. We know what the current account deficit is. It's where the outflows, the payments, the debits are greater than the inflows, the credits coming in for things like goods, services, incomes and transfers. And Australia has had a persistently high current account deficit since the 1980s. So when we think about external stability, we need to look at why Australia has maintained a CAD and also what are the consequences of having a high CAD. If we think about why Australia has had a persistent CAD, there are three views that are useful to consider. One is that the CAD is a result of Australia's trade deficit, so the fluctuations in export income. The second view is that the CAD is due to Australia's savings investment gap and the need to fill that with foreign investment. And the third view is that CAD is all about Australia's ability to actually bring in capital inflows and could be a good thing in that way. And this is what's known as the Pitchford thesis. So we're going to take a look at each of these in turn. So the first view here is that the current account deficit is a trade deficit. So when the CAD first emerged as an issue, the main concern was that we were, as a country, incurring current account deficits because of Australia's trade issues. So the idea is that the BOGS deficit, so the trade deficit, the value of imports being higher than the value of exports, was dragging the current account into deficit. And then we think, well, okay, why were people thinking this? Why were there risks to Australia's external stability because of trade issues? The first issue is that Australia lacks international competitiveness in producing higher value exports, such as elaborately transformed manufactures. So Australia has mostly lost its key manufacturing industries because they could not compete with China. That was just not possible. So Australia imports manufactured goods, which are typically higher value, and exports intermediate unfinished goods in a lot of ways. As a result, BOGS can often be in deficit. If we are importing goods that are of higher value to the things that we are exporting, then that will put BOGS into deficit or increase the deficit, which will contribute to the current account deficit. The second issue in terms of the CAD as a trade deficit is our terms of trade. In our terms of trade, Australia's comparative advantage has been in agriculture and mining, right? That's where Australia's advantage has been. When commodities are in high demand, Australia's terms of trade would improve. Okay, so that's improving export revenue, BOGS, and also the current account deficit. But commodity prices can fluctuate wildly. They can go up, they can go down, they can go up by a lot, they can crash by an enormous amount. If commodity prices fall, Australia's terms of trade will deteriorate, reducing export revenue and worsening BOGS and the CAD. So if Australia's terms of trade turns unfavourable, then that's going to affect BOGS and CAD in a negative way. So what's the point? Australia relies on exports of commodities at the moment based on our export base. Australia has that narrow export base where commodities are a huge portion of what we export. By relying on commodities, a fall in their prices could set off a significant increase in the current account deficit. So in terms of these points, we can see that the current account deficit has been portrayed as a trade deficit, as a problem between the money that Australia receives for its exports and the money that it pays for its imports.